Good morning, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the second Storytime with Beth live stream. We'll hang out for a little bit, see who shows up. For those of you who are watching later, happy February. And yeah, I'm excited to do another live reading with you all. Let's see. January was a very long month. So to review a little bit what has happened since the last live stream, I've been working a lot on editing Aurelia the Nightwalker. That is going to be the third Steward story, short story. The Steward stories are a series of short stories that are kind of bridging the gap between Child of the Cates and The Steward's Apprentice, which will be the second novel in the Firstborn's Legacy. There's about a 400-year time gap between those two novels, and a lot happens, so I wanted to share some of that with you all. And that's why I'm writing 7 short stories to span the interim. I'm planning at this present time to publish Aurelia the Nightwalker sometime in March. There will be more details on that as it gets closer, and if you are interested in knowing more about it, you can sign up for my newsletter, which the link is in my bio description, and I'll be sending out information to my newsletter as it becomes available. Newsletter subscribers also get these short stories for free, which is a fun perk. Alrighty, let's see. So the last time in The Weaver's Blessing, we read chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1 is primarily an introduction to the world and the premise of this kingdom in the story. This kingdom has been given a blessing by a good magician, and the blessing was this. I'll read it to you. It's also on the back of the cover. The blessing is, "May this land ever draw its strength from the purity and fortitude of its rulers' hearts." So that basically means as long as the Kingdom of Klacken has good rulers who have good, kind hearts, the land is going to flourish. But when there's an evil ruler, the land is going to fall into decay. Last month in our reading, we saw the land of Klacken be captured by King Eric of Cangraf, who was a ruler with a very evil, not pure heart. He killed most of the royal family. Princess Elaine escaped, and he didn't know that she escaped until chapter 2, when he sees a flower blooming, because Princess Elaine is now 18 years old and can claim a right to the throne. So that is where we're going to pick up today with chapter 3. We'll see if people join us as we read along, but chapter 3. At King Eric's command, all the slave hunters in the kingdom assembled in the main cities. "Hear this proclamation of His Majesty King Eric," the messenger read aloud to the gathered hunters. "There is a particular girl in the kingdom, whom Ivan the magician has instructed the king to find. She is just 18 years of age, with straight brown hair and clear blue eyes. Whoso brings in this one girl shall be rewarded with 50,000 coins of pure gold, an equal amount in pure silver, and the title of Baron, together with the forgiveness of all debts and crimes. Until such time as this maiden is found, there is a moratorium on all debt and criminal investigation, in order that the highest number of qualified men possible may search for the girl." Oh, hi Nancy Pierce. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you. I just started reading chapter 3, so we're at the very beginning of today's reading section. In the crowd was a slave hunter by the name of Brandon Founder. He was young for a hunter, only 22, but all acknowledged he was one of the best. When he was only 17, Brandon's parents had died in a flash flood, leaving him to take care of his younger sister Claire. Soon after, she lost her mind to the poison mist and burned their house to the ground. Homeless, parentless, and jobless, Brandon found a family who would take care of Claire for a monthly wage. The only course open to him was becoming slave hunter, the despised mercenaries of King Eric's rule who lurked in the dark and captured men, women, and children who strayed too far from civilization alone. Determined to become successful, Brandon first became the apprentice of a local tracker who taught him how to read on the earth the story of those who traveled it. A year later, Brandon hiked into the outskirts of the kingdom. There he excelled at hunting, bringing in more slaves than anyone else, and there his grief consumed him. Mourning for his parents and sister, eaten by guilt at divesting people of freedom, he followed the path of his elders and nearly lost himself in drink, until he had to borrow great sums to pay for Claire's care and his own liquid crutch. 50,000 gold coins, 50,000 silver coins, and the forgiveness of all debts was just what he needed. He could take care of Claire himself and quit the slave trade. If this 18-year-old girl was the key to his retirement, and he hoped his redemption, heavens help the poor girl, he would find her and bring her in before the week was out. Taking a deep gulp of ale, he shouldered the pack that contained all his worldly possessions, and strode out into the rain. Finding a specific person, he reasoned, was more difficult than finding any person whose path he should stumble upon. Brandon began, not by striking out on his own, as was his habit, but by tailing a group of hunters who agreed to split the reward between themselves, and went about inquiring after the brown-haired, blue-eyed girl. The other men were baffled, as was he, by how they should recognize the right girl with these minimal descriptive guidelines. Darkness fell. Since Klaken fell to the kingdom of Poldar, being outside at night was more dangerous than the average person desired to face. The group of hunters, with Brandon trailing them, headed to the nearest tavern for warmth, shelter, and the possibility of news. They settled loudly in front of a roaring fire, calling for drinks. Brandon wrung the water out of his cloak and hung it on one of the pegs by the door. After ordering a room for the night and a mug of beer, he settled into the shadows, near enough to hear and see all, but quiet and removed enough not to be seen. "Oh, boy, what are you doing all the way in here?" a loud burly man called out, ambling over to see his friends. "Bruce, what ho! You returned so soon!" They greeted Bruce the Brute, a famous hunter. "Ay, and just in time to hear that the king issued a proclamation in my leave," Bruce laughed. "Happen you tell an old mate what all the fuss is about?" "Gladly," they exclaimed. "Here it is. The king's out for an 18-year-old girl with brown hair and blue eyes. Says he'll give 5,000 gold and silver, baronetcy, and free pardon to him what brings in the very one. We all's come up as partners, looking for this very lass. Happen you join us?" Bruce the Brute's face was surprisingly thoughtful for such an oaf of a man. "Sure and I will," he agreed. "Now, lads, listen you. It happened so long ago I near forgot, but you remember my old neighbor, what used to valet for the king?" "Aye, we do." "Well now, see this. It was all very hushed up, but just about the time old Beardface attacked, they got themselves another daughter, though you could hardly tell they had such a passel full. Now there I was visiting not 5 days ago, and I hear them call her Elaine. I thinks to myself, ain't that the self-same name as our poor dead princess? And get this, her hair is brown and her eyes are blue, though old Derek's family is all fair-haired and dark-eyed." Unconsciously, Brandon leaned forward as Bruce spoke. It was unbelievable. His mouth fell open. Could it be? The princess was still alive? "Reckon she must be the one the king wants," they concluded, and raised their mugs. "To Brucey, who's brought us luck this day. Come morning we'll be off to catch us a fortune." Did it matter that the prey was the princess? Brandon debated and sighed. It should, but a mere girl could not rule a kingdom or defeat a king and a magician. Besides, if he didn't get to her, 1,000 other hunters would, hunters more likely to abuse her before turning her in. He could not prevent it, so he may as well benefit from it. That decided, he headed upstairs to his room, stripped off his sodden boots and clothing, and fell instantly to sleep. Floorboards creaking in the silent building woke him. He glanced out the filth-streaked window and groaned. Surely Bruce and his boys would not be up yet, especially after consuming so much drink the night before. The sky was barely starting to lighten. Yet another creak and a footstep further down the hall convinced him he could not ignore whoever was up. Quietly he tiptoed to the door and peeked out into the hall, in time to see a gray head disappear down the stairs. It was an elderly man he remembered seeing downstairs the night before, listening raptly to the brute's story with wide eyes. Brandon decided he had enough time to follow him and return before the others left. Thankfully, his boots and clothing had dried by the heat of the small fire in his room. He dressed in seconds, carrying his boots as he walked close to the wall to avoid causing the floorboards to squeak, until he reached the tavern door and slipped them on. The old man was gone, but Brandon's sharp eyes picked up his trail as easily as if he had left behind footprints of bright yellow. He followed the trail to the stable, where he saddled his own horse and followed the freshest set of tracks in the post-rain mud. Once outside the city, it took him no effort to follow the trail. He nudged the horse into a gallop, wondering what the old man was about. Chapter 4. "Elaine, wake up!" an urgent voice whispered as someone shook her. The girl jolted herself from a deep sleep, dread overtaking her. She had been dreaming of the night her mother woke her and sent her away with Derek, and it seemed to her that she awoke into the same nightmare. Derek and his wife stood beside her bed, holding her clothes in a full bag. "Lane," the mother said, "you must get ready." "What has happened? Is Jeremy all right?" She inquired about their oldest son, who had gone to trade in the city the day before. He was not expected back for 2 days. "Jeremy is fine as far as we know," his mother said. "It is you who is in danger," Derek said, leaning on his crutch. "Old Albert just came to tell us grievous news. Child, the king knows you survived. He has every slave hunter in the kingdom out looking for you. Old Albert heard some of them talking last night. They'll be here in hours. It is no longer safe for you here with us." Elaine pushed out of bed and went to dress behind a curtain. Where could she go? This was her refuge, her hiding place. Everywhere else was King Eric's. "What can I do?" she asked the couple. "There is a kingdom to the northwest, Ferngold," Derek replied. "They ever were our allies. Go to them and they will shelter you." In her head stretched out hundreds of miles of wasted land, dodging mists and hunters, pitfalls and animated plants, alone against the evil king's curse. She drew in a shuddering breath and tried to find strength inside. When she was dressed much as she had been 12 years before, she stood in front of Derek and his wife. The man put one hand, which was not on his crutch, on her shoulder and looked at her. When he spoke, she could tell he was fighting to hold back his emotion. "We trained you to defend yourself, Princess," he said. "Remember what you learned. Find shelter before night. Whatever you do, keep moving. When Jeremy returns, we'll send him after you. He has the horse, so he may catch you before you reach Ferngold." "Come, you must leave now," the mother said, leading her to the family room that functioned as kitchen, dining room, and parlor. Old Albert sat by the cook stove, warming his hands. Elaine went over to him and kissed his gray head. "Thank you for coming, Albert. You saved my life. She smiled brightly. "Oh, my princess, it is nothing." The old man blushed. "Now be off with you, or it'll be for nothing." She hugged Derek and his wife, bidding them tell the children goodbye for me, and give grandmother and grandpa a hug. Tell Jeremy I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye, and I hope he finds me. Bless you for your kindness to me these past years. Go, Lane, the mother said, pushing her out the door. May the magician's blessing protect you, Derek added. It was still quite early in the morning. Dismal, misting clouds blocked the rising sun from view. Elaine shouldered her bag and turned in the direction she knew to be northwest, beginning to walk through the forest. It was a sad place, but it was alive. The trees were ill, but kept growing slowly, and now, in what should have been spring, they produced a smattering of limp leaves and a handful of brown flowers. Near the edge of the section around Derek's house, in view of the black, dead, bare trees, Elaine paused to pick one of the flowers and looked at it sadly. She could still remember playing in fields of brilliant flowers as a young child, before King Eric's black heart destroyed the land. She wished with all her heart that the flower in her hand would be healed. To her surprise, it began to grow and take on color. Soon it was a delicate pink blossom. What was going on? Elaine wondered. She touched the tree from which the flower had come, and wished again. It took longer, but in a minute the tree was healthy, strong, and in full bloom. Elaine let out a gasp of delight. I can save it, she said of the land. An animal startled nearby, making her jump and remember where she was. She was alone, running for her life with hundreds of slave hunters after her. She picked up her bag, which had dropped to the ground, looked over her shoulder, and started walking at a faster pace. As she walked, she longed to stop and wish each plant and stream back to health, but she could not stop. Neither did she see that, behind her, life was starting to return. It was not as complete as the restored tree, but it was equal to the half-healthy woods around Derek's house, and it did not fade when she left. By the time afternoon arrived, she was too tired to think of anything but getting to Ferngold. She had left the forest and entered a dangerous swampland. Every ounce of energy was focused on avoiding the acid ponds, snatching weeds, slimy quicksand, and hidden pits. She was standing on a splintery, rotten log, teetering over what she was sure was a 20-foot deep hole, when an owl screeched. Startled, she whipped her head up to see what had made the bird cry out. In an instant she lost her balance. She fell with a short shriek and hit her head on the log as she fell, dropping into unconsciousness. Chapter 5. The old man went to a cottage in the forest. A ways away, Brandon dismounted and continued cautiously on foot. Everything about this place was unusual. The trees had leaves. There were plants on the ground. And, most unnervingly of all, there was a bird tweeting nearby. Brandon settled behind a tree and watched the cabin. In a couple minutes a girl emerged and started walking northwest. She was plainer than he had expected. Weren't princesses supposed to be the most beautiful maidens in their lands? But she had brown hair and looked 18. From the distance he could not see her eyes. It was early yet. He decided to give her a couple more hours of freedom before he captured her. He remounted and followed her trail at a distance. At leisure, still disturbed by the state of the cottage's forest, Brandon noticed even stranger things. The first was a cherry blossom tree in full, glorious bloom. He stopped his horse in shock and stared at it for 5 minutes before he could continue. Along her trail, other things were starting to grow. Black skeleton trees turned brown and grew a couple leaves. Wildflowers cautiously pushed up. Writhing roots and branches that loved to snatch at passers-by, human and animal alike, grew still and dropped with a sigh. In a few places the poison mist that crept along the ground curled back on itself when it reached the princess's footsteps. When they entered the swamp, he paused by what should have been an acid pond. From her footprints it was clear that the princess had touched its edge. No longer was it a murky green. It was perfectly clear. His horse sniffed it, whinnied in pleasure, and took a drink. Water. The acid pond was pure water. An owl's hoot and a girl's scream called him forward. It was unbelievable that someone else could have beat him in capturing the prize. He could not let them take her from him, not when he had been so close. He pushed his horse forward until the girl's trail stopped abruptly, though none other intercepted it. Did someone snatch her from the sky? No, there was a scuff mark and something red, and a strand of brown hair stuck to the bark of a log. She had fallen into a pit underneath it. Brandon lashed a strong rope to the end of the fallen log and slid down it slowly. At the bottom of the pit lay the unconscious princess. Her head was bleeding, but that was not the worst of it. Marsh weeds were slowly wrapping around her limbs, drawing her down into the mud. Brandon slashed the weeds with his knife. They fell off of her, leaving red welts on her skin, but more took their place and started wrapping around her ankles and back around her. There was no time to deal with her bleeding head wound. He lashed the end of the rope firmly under her arms, slashed the groping weeds, and climbed hand over hand up the rope. At the top he knelt and began pulling with all his strength. At first nothing happened. Then the weeds let go at once, and he carefully drew the princess out of the hole. While she was still unconscious, he cleaned her wound with water from the pond her touch had purified, wrapped her head, and bound her to his horse's back. Just to be certain she was the right girl, he carefully pulled the collar of her dress to show her left shoulder. There, plain as day, was the heart-shaped mark of the weavers. It was she. He covered her shoulder back up, with the brief thought that, if his sister was ever taken by a hunter, he hoped the blackguard would have the decency to do the same for her. Without wasting any more time, he started leading the horse southwards toward the capital. He had his captive, and he was not going to risk losing her again. He started calculating how much money he would have left over after he paid for Claire's care, bought a house, hired a maid, and bought all the things he had ever wished he had. When night came, he sought shelter in a cave in a ravine that used to be a river. The princess was still unconscious, which began to worry him. Brandon spread out his cloak on the cave floor and laid the girl on top of it. For a moment he watched her as he considered how to awaken her. She looked so pure, so wholesome, and so innocent. His conscience poked him. How could he turn her in to the enemy? He felt guilt and, strangely, something that almost reminded him of hope. The guilt was stronger, though, and anyways, feelings brought weakness and pain. He took a quick drink from his flask before pulling a vial of smelling salts out of his pack. It was not uncommon for captured people to faint, which was extremely inconvenient, so he carried salts with him just in case. Kneeling on the rock floor, he lifted her head and started talking in what was meant to be a soothing voice, but was really only gruff as he administered the smelling salts. "Hello, princess. You fell down and hit your head. Don't worry, you're okay. We're in a cave for the night. You're lying down because you were unconscious. Don't move. I don't know if you're hurt anywhere else." The girl twitched and gasped, then looked up at him. Her clear blue eyes caught and held his brown ones. She seemed to read his very soul. His voice faltered. He felt uncomfortable and dirty for planning to turn her in, and he felt uncannily drawn to her. This was not good. Not good at all. And that is the end of chapter 5. Love to hear your thoughts, what you're thinking of the story so far, any predictions you have. But that is all for today. Thank you for reading along with me, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.